actually would like to welcome Kevin Brown to the front too.
I'm going to just ask Ty 2 or 3 questions just so we can become a little bit familiar with him, get a bit of understanding about your background.
All right.
So we know where you're coming from when you're sharing
Sure.
your message tonight. Come on through. So we met you at our local church context here in the city before, Ty, just a few months ago. I remember meeting you.
Was it a few months ago?
Time gets by pretty
A
quickly.
year ago?
Oh, really? No.
I don't know. It seems like a year ago.
Probably 6 months, I'd guess.
Okay. All right.
Anyway, Ty, you come from the States. You're
Yes.
involved in a ministry called Light Bearers Ministry.
Yes.
And tell us a little bit about that to start with. What's that all about?
Light Bearers is primarily a publishing, teaching, and media ministry. Those are the 3 areas that we focus on. We run a publishing house that has presses and folding machines.
So you
and
write?
that kind.
You do some of the writing?
I do a lot of the writing, yeah. And that publishing house prepares literature in about 35 different languages.
Yeah.
And we
And
fill
this is like
containers.
in terms of quantity, container size
Yeah.
loads?
Each year we publish somewhere in the vicinity of about 25 to 35 million pieces of literature that are shipped by container load to various countries around the world. So that's the publishing. The
So
teaching,
is it largely
yeah.
third world, or developing world? Or?
Yeah, mostly we send the containers of literature to countries in Africa, South and Central America, and Eastern European countries.
And this is all free to the
It's all free.
end user?
Yeah.
All free.
Yeah.
So you must have a good, a lot of support behind you. You've got a team of people involved in that.
Yeah, we have a staff
Plus-
of about 17 people that work
Okay,
full time in the ministry, and then we have a number of people around the world that are financial
and
supporters.
Financial
Yeah.
supporters, okay.
Mhm.
So there's your print. Now, what about, you said something about media. Is that something to do with
Media.
Digma and other things as well?
Yeah. Digma is the most recent project. It is a series of short videos. Maybe each one is about 5 to 7 minutes long. Any of you can look it up. Digma.com. I have a fellow media person here, and we were talking about it earlier. So Digma.com, D-I-G-M-A, and that's our most recent media project that you can look at. They're short videos that can be emailed free to friends or uploaded to your Facebook, and they deal with a variety of different subjects, but primarily dealing with subject matter regarding the existence of God and the character of God.
So you have, of course, web access. So it's e-literature as well. We can get on there and look at a whole range of stuff without having to look at the hard copies.
One website is Digma.com. The other website that you would find most of our material at is called lightbearers.org.
Okay,
Yeah.
So you've partnered up recently with another ministry called Arise, and that's
Right,
largely like global
yeah.
training. Is that their
Yeah.
primary-
It's a discipleship ministry. Basically, we run a few courses each year. We're running a new course here in Australia, in fact, at the Gold Coast, and one at Warunga that we're just finishing called Bible Boot Camp.
If you don't understand his American, Warunga is
Warunga. How would you say it?
Like Warunga. Yeah. So we say Australian, not Australian. It's just
Yeah,
Australian.
and you say America.
Yeah.
With an R on the end.
Yeah.
All right.
Anyway, look, that gives us a bit of an insight. So you're here for a couple of months, I think you mentioned.
Yeah.
A couple of months in Australia. You've got wife and children back home missing you? Well, they with you
My
here?
wife is here.
Okay,
My
very good,
children are in the United States
Yeah. Well, they in,
of America, and they are hopefully missing us. Yes.
Yeah. So they in boarding school or with other family looking after them? Or they're grown up, or-
No, they're grown up. They're all
Okay.
graduated from college, and
Okay. He looks too young to have grown up.
we adopted all of them when we were 9.
So look, Ty, we've got, I understand, 2 fairly lengthy presentations to make
Lengthy?
tonight.
I hope
well,
they're
I
lengthy.
mean, 40, 45 minutes. I don't really know.
Hour and a half.
Perhaps all in total.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So we're looking forward to that.
Okay.
And there may be a few others trickle in. Don't let them phase you. Just keep rolling
going.
on.
I'll do it.
They'll
Yeah.
find their way to
Yeah.
the seat.
Yeah.
Thanks very much, Ty.
So I've been invited to do a relationship seminar. Everybody has relationships. Every single person here is in some kind of relationship or another, right? But the kind of relationships that we're particularly interested in tonight is the ooh la la kind of relationships. Male-female relationships where the chemistry occurs. So we're not going to be talking about the relationships between parents and children. Sorry.
We're not going to be talking about the relationships between best friends or what you would call best mates, right?
Biffles, we call them.
What?
Biffles.
Biffles, okay, whatever that is, all right? We're not going to be talking about any of those kind of relationships. We're going to be talking about the relationship between a male and a female in particular. Now, in order to really explore this subject, we need to begin by talking a little bit about human psychology. We need to explore what's going on in our minds, in our hearts, and I want to do that by telling you about a diabolical experiment that was conducted in the 12th century by Frederick II, the Emperor of Germany. And this diabolical experiment yielded some data that was unexpected, because Frederick of Germany was interested to discover, welcome, have a seat. Frederick of Germany, the emperor, he was curious to find out what language children would grow up to speak if never spoken to. In other words, if children grew up in silence, what language would they naturally grow up to speak? Now, Frederick of Germany had a hunch that it would be German. This was obvious to him. He thought that German was the superior language, the language of heaven, the language of angels. Have you ever heard German, by the way? It's not the heavenly language. It's very... It doesn't sound beautiful at all right? But he was a very egocentric man. He was very proud. And German was his mother tongue, and so he thought that if children were never spoken to, of course they would grow up to speak German. That was his hypothesis. Well, he conducted an experiment to make this discovery. And the experiment was very horrible. He commanded that babies be taken from their mothers at birth. So he had his soldiers go through the villages, and as soon as the babies were born, take them from the mother's arms. And the children, the babies, were then put in a large room in Frederick's castle, and there were nurses that were given charge over the babies. And they were given two very explicit commands from the king, the nurses were. You are to raise these children in silence. You may never speak in their presence. You remember what his hypothesis was, right? He wanted to raise them in silence to see what they would speak. So he said, silence. When the nurses come to the children, when the nurses come in the room, they are never to speak a word. But there was a second rule, a second command, because Frederick understood the nature of females. He knew that if females became bonded to babies, they would be tempted to sympathize with them and to speak. So he said, not only may you not speak, but you may not touch them. No touch. So utensils were made by the artisans of the kingdom from wood for the changing of the clothing and the bathing and the feeding. Everything had to occur with no contact, flesh to flesh. And these were the two rules, silence and no touching the babies. So as the babies were brought into this experiment, what language do you think they grew up to speak?
No.
No language at all, that's right. Do you know why they spoke no language at all?
Didn't hear anything.
They died for want of touch. Now, in modern medical science, this phenomenon is called failure to thrive. There was an experiment conducted, not so diabolical, in the United States of America, and that experiment segregated premature babies, babies that are born too early. The traditional method of care put them in a little incubator with tubes for feeding with IVs, but no germs, and so keep them in the little bubble, right? But they wanted to do an experiment to find out if there was a better treatment. So they took some of the babies in what is called a controlled study, Are you familiar with that language? The controlled study said, let's take half of these premature babies and we will separate them from the traditional method of treatment, and we will only change one factor. 3 times a day, the nurses will reach their hands into the incubator and stroke their little arms and touch their faces and rub their feet and the head and just touch them, their little tummies. Just touch them for a few minutes and then remove their hands. 3 times a day, they were to be just touched. That's all. Everything else was the same. And it was proven that the babies who were touched would gain body weight more rapidly and had a much higher survival rate. Why? Why did the babies die in Frederick's experiment for want of touch? And why did the babies in the controlled study in the United States, why did those babies gain body weight more rapidly? It wasn't that they were getting more nourishment, they weren't getting more food. Everything else was the same. Why are they gaining body weight more rapidly just from being touched? Well, here's the data. Here's the evidence that has, over the last 15 years, has been coming to the table in much of the scientific community. Here's the data. Human beings, listen carefully now, this is the point. Human beings, are you a human being, by the way?
Yeah.
Okay, so this applies to you, and it applies to me, all right?
Jesus is a human being.
Human beings are psychologically, emotionally, and biologically engineered for love. Did you hear what I said? Human beings, that includes you, you are made, wired, engineered, whatever word you want to put there, you are designed to live on love. The babies who gained more rapid body weight weren't getting more food or nourishment, they were only being touched, and they were more healthy. It has been proven in additional controlled studies that the simple act of affectionate or friendly touch. If I reach out my hand and I say, good evening, nice to meet you. What is your name?
Rita.
Hi, Rita. You have a nice smile. It's nice to meet you. We're just touching, that's all. It's very simple. It's very simple. I say, brother, how are you?
Good, thank you. Sorry.
You all right?
Yes.
We're just touching, that's all. But here's what the data has proven. That when we touch, very simply, the white blood cell count goes up. So the ability of the body to fight disease is increased incrementally, right? So it has been proven that if a person, for example, lives in an environment, a social environment where they have family relationships that are pleasant and friendly, where there is love and affection, for example, that those individuals have a longer life expectancy, and they are more capable of resisting any disease that encroaches upon them. But people who live in environments where there is hostility and anger and criticism, and they are continually in a state of emotional upheaval, where they don't feel good about their relationships, they're more inclined, the immune system drops, and they are less likely to be able to resist disease. These are scientific facts that have been coming more and more to light, to the surface, over the last 10 to 15 years. And what this is proving is that human beings are made for love. Just like a car, an automobile has a designer, right? And those who design automobiles have designed the inner workings of an automobile in such a way that combustion occurs with an energy source. What is the energy source for an automobile? Petrol. Diesel. What is the energy source for a human being? Love, that's right. Just like the automobile is designed for love, the human being is designed for love. Children who are raised in an environment where their parents love them will be more secure, more affirmed, and generally more successful in their future relationships. But if you're raised in an environment where there is continual anger and hostility and hatred and angry words are spoken, then most likely you will struggle in your future relationships. You will be inclined to repeat those patterns unless you make a deliberate choice to break the cycle and to do something different with your life, which is what happened with me, just to give you an example so nobody here feels bad. I was raised in a home, and I'm not going to make it sound worse than it was, and I'm not going to go into the details, but I was raised in a home in which my mother was the only person that was genuinely good, and even she struggled. There was craziness and abuse everywhere. I was surrounded as a child with drug addicts and alcoholics and violence and screaming and yelling and dishes thrown around the room and crashing on the walls and children running for their bedroom and locking the door to try to be safe. That's the home I grew up in. But I made a decision that I would break the cycle, that I would never participate in those kinds of social patterns, and I never have. It's a decision, but if you don't make a deliberate decision, you will repeat the cycles. You see what I'm saying? Human beings are made for love, and that is, now listen very carefully, human beings are engineered, made, designed for love. That is the most fundamental truth of your identity as a human being. The most basic, elementary reality is that you were made for positive relationships. You can't live a fulfilling and satisfying life unless you are in relationships with others. Brothers and sisters and mothers and fathers and children, with parents and best friends, and ultimately the male-female relationship. Now, what we see happening in our world, in the popular culture of our world, is that our popular culture is obsessed with one dimension of the male-female relationship. Can you guess which dimension it is? Sex, that's right. In fact, when the internet was first being created, and we saw the startup companies like Yahoo, and then Google came along, and these are what are called search engines, right? What is a search engine on the internet? This is where you type in a field, a topic of interest, right? And search for data on that topic. Well, when the internet first began, there was a large board that was created, a digital board that would reveal the #1 searches from hour to hour, day to day. What were people typing? What were they searching for? Searching. Millions of people sitting at their computer typing in what they are most interested in. #1 topic, sex, on the board. But here's the fascinating thing. There was another #1 topic at the beginning that was in competition back and forth, and they were moving on the board. Sex and God. That's right. God. These are the two subjects that were most searched for on the internet in the early days of its development. This is fascinating because we have to ask ourselves the question, don't we? What is the relationship? What is the connection? What is the cohesion in the human psyche between the subject of sexuality and the subject of God? Do these subjects meet anywhere, or are they mutually exclusive? Are they in competition with one another, or do they have some kind of common ground with one another? Now, I would like to suggest to you that there is common ground and that there is a point of departure. Again, there is common ground between the subject of sexuality and the subject of God. There is common ground, and there is a point of what? Departure. Let's explore this together more carefully. Now, most of you don't have a Bible tonight, so I won't have you turn there. I'll just quote these scriptures, and if you think you hear some heresy, you can go check and see if these scriptures are actually there, okay? The Bible opens with a very fascinating introduction. The first book of the Bible is what? Genesis. And so the first chapter of the Bible is chapter 1. And what is the first verse of the Bible? In the beginning, but what's the rest? God. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? In the beginning, God. Now, here's the fascinating thing. Hello. Here's the fascinating thing. In the beginning, God, the word God is not the generic word God. In the Hebrew language, it is a name. It is a proper name. And the name is Elohim. Elohim is the name. It's not God in a general sense. It's God in a specific sense. In the culture that surrounded Moses when he was writing this, there were all kinds of deities that people believed in. There was Dagon and Ishtar, and there was Baal, and there was Molech, and all kinds of gods. But this was a specific God, Elohim. Now, the unique thing about this name is that Elohim is completely different than any name you've ever heard, because it is a plural noun. Do you know what a plural noun is? That would be like me introducing myself to you this evening and saying, thank you for having me here this evening to share with you. My name is Ties. Ties. Plural. How many? Exactly. It's not appropriate. I wouldn't introduce myself in a plural form, would I? No, because I'm a single individual. I'm a solitary creature. There's not more than one of me, right? So I would introduce myself to you in the singular grammar. I would say, I'm Tai, singular, right? But this is very strange, because God introduces himself as a plural reality. Elohim is a plural noun in the Hebrew, so the implication is there's more than one. So then in Genesis 1, that's Genesis 1:1, you come down to verses 26 and 27, and there you read, so God, it's very interesting, God said, Elohim said, let us, yes, us, make man in our image. So God created man, that is mankind, in his own image, male and female created he them. So the image of God, let me just ask you a question. Is the image of God the male? Yes or no? No. Is the image of God the female alone by herself? No. What is the full-orbed image of God according to Genesis? The male and the female together as one constitute the totality of God's image. So excuse me?
Why do we use the pronoun he for the Holy Spirit, God the Son, and God the Father?
Because we're using...
He is a masculine.
Yes, because we're...
Where does that fit?
Because we're using a translation that is English and that is culturally conditioned to our history. But
What about the Hebrew translation?
the Hebrew also has he sometimes.
So
But
they
he...
don't use her.
Excuse me?
They don't use her or she.
No.
Meaning, well, he.
Yeah.
So where does he fit into the...
I think that I think that our subject will, to some degree, answer the question,
Oh, I'm sorry.
I hope, in the course of the study. But our study here tonight is about relationships, and I don't really have the time, with the time that's allotted me, to talk about the gender issues of Scripture, if you don't mind. So the point is this. The point is this. God is revealed in Scripture as a plurality of relationships. So we could say it this way. Think this through for a moment. God is not a singularity of person. God is a plurality of relationship. So God, as God, is a community. God is a social unit. God, we could say it this way, very straightforward and simple. God is a friendship that has existed for all eternity past. God has never existed as a solitary being. God has always existed in relationship. Now, if this is true, and this is what Genesis 1 is indicating, then human beings were therefore made to live, to exist in relationships. The image of God in Genesis is not merely the male, not merely the female, but the male and the female as a composite, as a whole. In other words, in God, all of the realities that pertain to the feminine characteristics and all of the realities that pertain to the masculine characteristics are present in this one reality we call God. So we could ask ourselves the question, and I'll just venture out on this a little bit since the question was asked. If we ask ourselves the question, is God a man? The answer is no. God is God, and He transcends that category. Is God a woman? No. God is God, and He transcends, she transcends if you prefer. We're using human language that is limited. But God, as God, transcends those categories. He's not a created being of any kind. He is beyond that, but there are characteristics in God that are manifested in the relationship that exists between the male and the female. So then, as the story of Genesis continues to unfold, it's very fascinating. God Himself performs the first wedding or marriage, if you will. The man and the woman are brought together, and God says to the man and the woman that they are to be, as it were, one flesh, that they are to be brought together as one. And this language is so fascinating because it essentially means, now try to wrap your mind around this, this is very crucial for where we're going regarding relationships. The Bible, when it describes God, says simply that God is love. When God created the man and the woman, He was creating His image, which is love. Love, by definition, is, listen, other-centered rather than egocentric. Love, by definition, is all about the other, and the other is all about that other. So I am living for you, and you are living for me, creating the geometric shape of a circle in relationship. So Adam is described in Genesis as living with total focus and devotion to Eve. So Eve can do one of two things. She can say, I love this arrangement. Let it all be about me. Or Eve can herself reflect and reciprocate Adam's love and let it be all about Adam. And there is no want in that relationship. He is living for her, and she is living for him. And the Bible describes this poetically by saying that the man and the woman were naked and not ashamed. It's a very strange language to find in Scripture. It almost seems like it's out of place in the narrative, in the story. You're just going along and you're hearing a story, and God created the man and the woman, and they were naked and not ashamed. It's very odd. I wouldn't say to you, I had a great day today. I woke up, I had breakfast, I went out for a walk, I went to the grocery store, and I was naked and not ashamed. I would never throw that in as an incidental fact because it's not natural to our present condition as human beings. But for Adam and Eve, it was their natural state. Naked and not ashamed simply means, think about this, what kind of psychological framework would you have to be in to be naked and not ashamed? Pure, that's right, innocence. You have to be completely lacking in self-consciousness so that your total focus is on the other. Adam living for Eve, Eve living for Adam. But then, after the fall of mankind, the language changes. In chapter 3 of Genesis, I think it's in verse 7, it says that Adam and Eve, it says they realized or they knew now that they were naked and they made coverings for themselves. What's happening there psychologically? Now there's self-awareness, self-consciousness. Now it's about me, and for you it's about you. And this is the source of all friction in relationships. Psychologically, emotionally, relationally, all of us experience the breakdown of relationships to one degree or another. And if you trace the breakdown of the relationship, usually it is traceable to one or the other, or usually both of the individuals being self-protective, self-centered, self-exalting, or egocentric in some manner. So that every ailment that human beings experience relationally is traceable to self-centeredness as opposed to other-centeredness. Now this is very, very dangerous to think about this, because the natural thought is to say, wait a minute, but I am an individual and I need to look out for my what? Self. And if I don't look out for myself, no one will. So every man for himself, every woman for herself. Move, follow, or get out of the way. I just happen to be my favorite person. Get used to it. Nobody else is going to live for me, so I'm going to live for me. But here's the problem with that. If I live for myself, people relationally begin to gravitate away and to back up and to build barriers because I don't feel safe for them. Because they know that if push comes to shove, I'm going to choose my best interest over theirs, and if somebody is going to suffer, it's going to be you, not me. And when people sense that, even only in the realm of sensing it, walls go up. Protective barriers go up. And we don't want to get close and we don't want to get intimate for fear of what? For fear of violation, for fear of pain, for fear of hurt. And so we build shields and bubbles and we separate emotionally from people and we keep them at arm's length for fear of pain. So the Genesis account is fascinating because it helps us to understand, number one, that human beings are designed or engineered psychologically, emotionally, and even biologically for love. We were made to live in love. And love is essentially self-giving and other-centered in its nature. The second thing we learn from the Genesis account is that human beings, while we were made for love, that human beings have experienced some kind of break in the logic of love, so that we are now essentially inclined to self-preservation. And this is what is called in theology the fall, with a capital F, the fall of humanity, the fall of mankind. The fall of mankind is a psychological and emotional and spiritual descent into self-preservation. Now, what does all of this have to do with relationships here and now today? I'm going to lead you through a series of points that I call the 6 secrets of lasting love. All right? The 6 secrets of lasting love. Now, in order to get there, I'm going to begin by sharing with you one overarching principle that is articulated in the Bible. One overarching principle that is going to work out in all of these various principles that we're going to be enunciating. And I'll just read it to you. Again, if you have a Bible, you can look at it. It's in 1 Peter chapter 3 and verse 7. So Peter is the one speaking. And Peter is describing a key principle that we want to home in on, all right? He says, addressing the husbands, addressing the male in the relationship, he says, husbands, he says, live with your wives with understanding, giving honor to the wife. Giving what, everybody? What's the word? Honor. So there are 2 words here I want to focus on. He says, dwell with your wife with 2 things, understanding and honor. Understanding and honor. All right? First of all, what is understanding? Understanding means perception, discernment. You comprehend the principles in play, right? In the book of Proverbs, we're told that wisdom is the number one thing. It's the principal thing that we should pursue because wisdom builds a successful life. Wisdom simply means you understand relational dynamics. It means you understand how things intersect and work, like the weaving of a fabric to create a strong and beautiful cloth, versus taking a pile of threads and throwing them on the ground and making a large tangled mess out of them. According to the Apostle Peter, a husband has a responsibility. A wife has the same responsibility, of course. But the husband, from Peter's perspective, as the aggressor in the relationship and as the stronger, at least physically, if not emotionally, but the man is called upon to understand his wife. Why? Because the opposite of understanding, listen very carefully, the opposite of understanding is ignorance, and ignorance leads to dominance, to control, to force, to coercion. And the sad thing is that males, because they happen to be generally, as a rule, physically stronger and larger, down through history, have used their physical strength as a leverage for dominance over females down through history. It is the greatest tragedy imaginable. Whereas Peter is taking a higher plane. He's saying, not dominance, not control, not coercion, not force, no, understanding. Comprehend, understand the principles that make for a good relationship. Do you know why Peter points in this direction? Because there's only one way that love can actually occur between a man and a woman, and that is voluntarily. The moment you introduce force or coercion or dominance into the relationship, love begins to recede and to be destroyed. A very simple illustration that I think I shared with you 6 months ago or a year ago when I was here, a very simple illustration would be to draw a distinction between an implement of force and what its limitations are. If I had a revolver, a gun this evening, and you took me seriously and I pointed the gun out at you and I said, right now, stand up, what would you do? You'd stand up. Well, maybe you wouldn't. You'd be a little stubborn and you'd get shot in the head. Well, but if I was a crazy man and I had a crazy look in my eye and I said stand up, most of you would stand up because you don't want to be shot. So what's the motivation there? Fear is the motivation. Stand up. What if I then said sit down? What would you do? You'd sit down. What if I said I'm hungry, make me spaghetti? You would look for the ingredients and you would try. Okay, so you understand intuitively that with an implement of force in my hand, I could manipulate your behavior, right? But what if in the next moment I say, stand up, sit down, make spaghetti, and in the next moment, what if I say, love me? Right? What if I said, I want you to be my best friend? Right now, feel loyalty toward me or I will shoot you. Right? Or what if I said to you, I want you to feel trust with a gun in my hand to your head? Trust, loyalty, love. Here's my question. Could you? Not would you, as if it would be within the realm of possibility. Would you say, well, let me think for a minute. I'll just think about it for a minute. Maybe, maybe not. Should I or shouldn't I trust him? Would it even be possible?
With God's help, yes.
It's mutually exclusive. You can't trust me. You might lie to me. You might say, I love you, don't shoot me. Right? But you would be lying. Because love as a principle, the Bible says love your enemies, right? So as a principle, you could love me, but you couldn't trust me. Let me put it this way. You couldn't like me. I have a gun to your head, and I say, I want you to like me. Could you like me? No. Could you trust me? Could you feel loyalty? No. Because these things are mutually exclusive. Force, dominance, squash the possibility of love. It kills the impulse for love in the heart. So Peter says, listen, if you want to have a good relationship as males and females, husbands, you need to understand. You need to live with your wife with understanding. That means that you need to avoid the inclination to manipulation, avoid the inclination to force and dominance, and give her the space to be an individual person with whom you have equality. Understanding. The woman, this is so fascinating, in the Song of Solomon in the Old Testament, which is the apex poem of love and romance, the woman says to Solomon, King Solomon, her boyfriend, her lover, her husband-to-be, the woman looks at Solomon, and this is her highest compliment. She says, you have eyes that are pools of understanding. She looks into her man's eyes and she sees understanding. He gets it. He understands. He's not merely forcing, dominating, pushing his weight around, using manipulation. No, he understands the relationship. Pools of understanding. As a human being, I would venture to say that if you really think about it, and you had to make a list of the top 5 things that you would want in a relationship, you would say, I want to be understood, would be one of them. I want to be understood. I want the sympathy of a person looking into my eyes and knowing that they understand me, rather than dominating or manipulating me, right? Understanding. Now, what do we need to understand? What is Peter saying? Well, we need to understand a lot of things about relationships. For example, this is very, very simple illustration. You can experience flight in one of 2 ways. You can experience the phenomenon of flight in a 747 jet, right? And if you were to learn how to fly a 747 jet, it would involve what? Are there a lot of buttons, a lot of levers, a lot of dials, a lot of things to pay attention to? Lots of lights blinking? Have you been in a 747 cockpit? You're surrounded with hundreds of things that you need to understand and pay attention to that need to be finely tuned in order to fly, right? There's another way you can fly. It's called skydiving. You can just walk to the edge with the open door, and you can jump and begin to fall through the air, and you only have one thing to remember. Pull the cord! That's all. Just pull the cord, and you hope for the best, right? Marriage is more like flying a 747 than skydiving. But most people enter marriage like skydiving. You go to the grocery store and you see her across the vegetables. There is the zucchini and the carrots, and there she is. And you look across and you feel the chemistry. Oh man, she's hot. And she looks at him. Oh man, look at his well-shaped eyebrows. And there is the beginnings of a relationship that occurs. So you get to know one another for a couple of weeks, and the next thing you know, after 2 weeks already, your lips are on one another's lips. You are touching, you are kissing, you are wrapping your arms around one another. Your bodies are touching in ways they ought not to touch in 2 weeks. And you do what in the United States is called you hook up. You just going for a little bit of a recreational ride. It's like a roller coaster or skydiving. It's just a short little journey that is based on the adrenaline of the moment. And the next thing you know, one person after another in our Western culture, just after a few months or maybe a year of dating and sexting and texting and going back and forth doing whatever is done, they say, hey, let's get married. And here's what it's like. They stand on the edge, take each other by the hand, with no understanding of the principles of relationships and what makes for a good marriage. All they understand is, you're hot. So are you. Let's jump. Whoa! Splat! And that's why in the United States, I don't know what the stats are here, but right now in the United States, it is abysmal. 5 out of 10 marriages in the United States right now end in divorce. 50%. 5 out of 10 end in divorce. Splat on the pavement. 5 out of 10 end in divorce. Now, there's 5 left, right? Do you know math? There's 10. You take away 5. How many do you have left? 5. Okay. Just making sure you're with me. Okay, so we got 5 left. And the studies reveal, through questionnaires and different methods of seeking this information, that of the 5 that remain, get this, 3 of them will settle into what is called cold coexistence. Do you know what cold coexistence is? You come home, you walk through the door. Hi. Hi. What's for dinner? Roast beef. Would you take the garbage out? Okay. I'm going to go out for a few hours. Don't wait up for me. Wouldn't think of it. Good night. Come home again tomorrow. The same thing. Sit at the table. There she is. There he is. Nothing in common. Nothing in common. That's called cold coexistence. And so they grow old together because their culture dictates that they have to stay married. This is cold coexistence. 5 end in divorce. 3 settle into cold coexistence. Welcome.
Welcome.
3 settle in to cold coexistence. And of the 2 that remain, it is generally understood that only 1 out of the total 10 ever attain lifelong intimacy of friendship in marriage. They're sad statistics, and it's because we enter this relationship, this most sacred and important of all relationships, we enter the relationship without understanding. We're not sure what it entails and what is important in the relationship to make it work. You don't get in your car and drive it until it's nearly out of gas and then say, you know what, I need to find some kind of liquid to put in the gas tank. No, you don't need some kind of liquid. You need a specific kind of fuel source. Petrol is what you need, right? Water won't work. Dairy milk won't work. Even tofu milk won't work as good as it is. You need something specific to make the automobile function the way it is designed to function. So we need to enter the relationship, Peter says, with understanding. But then he says this, husbands, live with your wife with understanding, giving honor. Wow, what is this? What is honor? Well, in the Greek, this word that Peter employs here simply means weightiness, heaviness, as opposed to, by contrast, lightness. Heavy versus light. Picture a stone, a large boulder versus a feather. And this is the difference between honor and dishonor. What does he mean? Think this through very carefully. Substance, that's right. That's a good word to use. It means that she has weight with him. When she speaks, what she says matters.
She has value.
She has value. That's right. So this sense of value, Peter says that the husband, are you married? Oh, you're not. Okay. Is this your sister? Okay. I'm sorry. If you were married, hypothetically, okay, the point is this, that honor means that you give significance and value to the other person. Let me ask you a question. Have you ever been in a social setting, just to make this point, where there's lots of people, let's say there's 50, 60, 100 people, maybe at church even. When you're done with the church service, you all go out here and you visit probably or something. Have you ever stood in a crowd of people and you're having a conversation with somebody and you have their eye contact and their attention for just a few seconds, and then you start to notice that their eyes are looking for someone else they'd rather talk to. They're looking over your shoulder, and then they do this body posture thing where they back up just one step at first. They're giving a cue. They want you to understand that they're done. Have you ever experienced that? What's that feeling? What's that emotional feeling? What are you feeling at that point?
Rejection.
What is it?
Rejection.
Rejection. That's right. Because I'm not engaged with you. I'm not paying attention to you. You're speaking, but I'm not listening. 3 minutes into the conversation, if I were to ask you, or you were to ask me, hey, what did I say 2 minutes ago? You'd say, is this a trick question? You've all had that experience. I've had that experience. This is where you feel light like a feather. You're not of significance in this interchange, versus being of significance. That's what Peter means. He says, husbands, live with your wives with understanding, first of all, comprehend the principles that are involved in a good relationship, and apply those principles. Like flying a 747, you got to just dial it in, turn all the buttons and levers out, and then you fly smoothly and you get elevation. You don't just say, hey, you're beautiful, you're handsome, we have some chemistry going on, let's jump.
Oh.
You're going to hit the ground, not running, you're going to hit the ground and be injured emotionally in the process. But this is how we do relationships. Peter says understanding, and Peter says honor. What is it like? Let me just ask you another question. What is it like when you know in a relationship with somebody that you have their full, undivided respect and attention? What's that like? There's hardly anything better you can imagine. Is there? No. When you know that the person is totally dialed in and wants to know what you're thinking and wants to know what you're feeling, and then makes the necessary modifications in order to resolve any problem there. But how do you feel when a person comes to the realization that they have hurt you and they just have excuses or self-justifications, or they blame you or blame somebody else. Well, in that kind of relationship, you begin to feel like you are undervalued. You're light. You're insignificant. So this is the overarching principle of a good male-female relationship. A good relationship involves, first of all, to understand one another. Secondly, to give weight and value to one another. Significance needs to be rendered to the other person. This is honor in a relationship. And we're different as males and females. We're not wired the same, so it requires effort to understand. I mean, if you want to get an engineering degree, is some effort going to be involved? Are you going to have to read some books? Are you going to have to study? Are you going to have to apply yourself? Yeah. And that's just a career. What about marriage? What kind of effort should be applied to understand if I'm a man, and I am, that didn't come out right. If I'm going to be married to this woman, how much effort should I put forth to understand this person? Should I even go so far as to study about it? I mean, I'll study engineering or I'll study biology to pursue a career. What's more important, a career or a marriage? Marriage. A marriage, by far. Because that's a relationship in which there could be irreparable damage. You could hurt somebody beyond repair. This is very important. Should you read about it? Should you study about it? Should you get counsel about it? Of course you should. If you're going to spend time and energy for a degree, you ought to spend time and energy for a relationship, shouldn't you? And I think that's why you came tonight, because you thought, oh, this is about relationships. I would like to have a relationship someday. Or I do have one now, and it's either going well and I want it to go better, or it's not going well and we're falling through the sky, about to hit the ground, and I'd like to understand it a little bit better. There are differences. Men and women are different by design. The best way I've been able to make a simple point regarding the difference between men and women is to simply say that men are like waffles. Do you have waffles here?
Yes.
Or do you? Okay. So do you know what waffles are? What is the geometric design of a waffle? Little squares that collect the syrup and the butter, right? So there's a very clear segregation process between all the little compartments. This is how these are stereotypes, so you understand we're speaking in generalities. There are always exceptions to the rule. But as a general rule, men are compartmentalized in the way they think. As a general rule, men are like waffles, but women are like spaghetti. Oh. Yeah. Yeah. With red sauce slathered all over it. What is the geometric design of spaghetti on a plate? Does it look anything like a waffle? You have many, many strands, right? And all of the strands are what? Intertwined, and they're all connected. And if you grab the end of one noodle and you begin to pull it, what will you see here? You see the whole, it's alive, right? It's moving. It comes out. That one noodle was intersecting with all kinds of other pasta, right? And you can't say that one is bad and the other is good. What you can say is that they're different. There are strengths and weaknesses on both sides. A man, for example, as a general rule, can segregate out a problem and focus on the problem to solve that single problem. But the weakness of the man is he generally doesn't see how that problem intersects with this one, right? So in marriage counseling, which I do quite a bit of, you will often have a situation in which the man will say, I will say to each of them, in brief, state what the problem is in the marriage. Well, he says, the problem is that we're not having sex anymore. And I look at him, and I look at her, and I look at him, and I say, so that's the problem. Yes, yes, that is the problem. Okay? And I look at her and I say, what is the problem? And she rolls her eyes. And she says, I will tell you what the problem is. That is the problem. The problem is that that is the way he thinks. And he doesn't understand that this is connected with this. That something is wrong with my spaghetti. It's all connected and intertwined, and he doesn't realize that the way he speaks to me for days and weeks and months, and we've been married for years now, and he's disrespectful, and he's dismissive, and he is sometimes completely aloof, and he won't even have a conversation with me. He could care less about what happened today while we were separated. He would rather surf the channels on the TV and eat potato chips. He doesn't have any interest in my mind, my heart. And that is connected to this. There is a connection, and he is sitting there going, huh. It's a mystery. It's an unsolvable mystery. I don't get it. And it takes effort for him to begin to allow the syrup and the butter to bleed over into other of his compartments. Now, on the woman's side, the woman, everything's connected, so her strength is, and this is so brilliant and beautiful, is that she is the better qualified usually to assess the quality of the relationship, not only in the marriage, but with their children. Because often the woman, as the children grow up and leave the home, certainly you've noticed this, the woman stays vitally connected with the children. And the man, occasionally, she hands the husband the phone and he says, hi. Did you have a good day? Oh, okay, here's your mom. That's it, it's over. No connection, nothing to say. Because he's compartmentalized. Her strength is that she understands the complexity of relationships. And she knows that there's an emotional component as well as a physical component. That there's an intellectual component. Welcome. So this is the difference. We need to understand that there are differences between the male and the female psyche in general. Again, there are exceptions to these rules. As a general rule, for example, men have greater muscle mass than the female biology, as a general rule. And then there are some exceptions to the rule where you will find some kick-butt girls who have some big muscles. But they're the exception to the rule. They are not the rule. So these are some of the differences between the male and the female experience in life. I didn't set that clock, so I have no idea what time we started.
8:18 now. We started about 10 past 7.
Okay, so we need to take a break, and when we come back after the break, we will get into the more relational nitty-gritty of how it is that you, anybody who is not yet in a relationship. First of all, we're interested in those who are not yet in a relationship, or maybe you are in a relationship, but you're not married, so you have options. How is it that you can pursue lifelong intimacy, lifelong love? And if you're already married, what kind of principles can you begin applying to the situation that will turn a bad marriage good? So those are the things we're going to look at, and we're going to give you some secrets for evaluating possible options. So as you meet men and women and you get to know them, how can I narrow it down to the right guy, to the right girl? How do I know who I should marry? How can I figure it out? How can I assess? And that's what we'll talk about after the break. So how long is the break?
Matthew, 10 minutes.
The break is 7 minutes.
10.
No, it's 7. The break is 7 minutes, and we're going to set a little clock here. So just move around a bit, get some circulation, move around,
The front of you, if you'd like a drink.
oxygenate your frontal lobe.